So my name is Theodora Morel, but I only hear Theodora when I'm in trouble. So I normally go by Theo. I am originally from St. Lucia, but I migrated to the US after high school at 19. I have worked across the globe with many companies, Kellogg, General Foods, Kraft, Nabisco, running the quality and food safety programs for them. So I've seen food safety from the top to the bottom globally. I am passionate about food safety. And one of the reasons why I joined Helen Daughter, both as a board member, as a facilitator, is as we go through food safety in the Caribbean, I think we don't have enough resources and enough focus on food safety, neither at the policy stage or the implementation stage. And when I've spoken to folks in the Caribbean, we don't believe for the most part that we have a food safety problem because it's not recorded. We don't track it. And if we get sick, we think it's something else. Also, a lot of us, we don't eat a lot of raw food, which is a good thing. We cook everything. But as you go through the session, we'll see what food safety is about. It's an exciting section. And as you go through, and I think you've had sustainable agriculture with Market Trust, you've had agribusinesses with Dr. Camilla Luisi, and then you had marketing, nutritional marketing. So when you go through this course, what I like about the Helen Daughter Ag business is that it trains you not just in one section, which most people don't do. You go to workshops, you get a book, and then you go home. This one gives you a holistic approach. So as you think through those, I want you to be thinking and connecting the pieces together, from the sustainable agriculture to the nutritional marketing, to food safety, to the financial literacy, to the last session, and see how they all link together. And what do you take from that, not just in isolation? Like I said, food safety is a topic that affects all of us, whether we are consumers, whether we are farmers, whether we are professionals. We have to trust the food that we eat. During the next 3 sessions, we'll delve into the critical aspect of food safety. We're going to explore its significance, the challenges that it brings, the best practices that we have, and we'll ensure the safety and quality of the food that we grow, we sell, or we eat. Throughout the next 3 sessions, I encourage your active engagement, which I was told that I don't have to worry about that because that group is very engaged. So I'm looking forward to that. And it helps me with the training because when you do virtual, it's kind of really hard to get engaged. So I look towards you and your feedback to know that I'm reaching you and you guys are getting it. So in this case, silence is like, if you're a comedian and you go on stage and you do a joke and nobody laughs, then you feel like you're bombing, right? So I'm looking for that engagement to know that you guys are enjoying it. You have the chat. If you have questions, there's a session in there. You can put it in there. If you have something you want to talk about while I'm discussing it, you can put your hands up. Either myself or Latoya will call through with it. I will leave space in between and after for question and answers. There is no bad question at all. There's a bad question is one that's not asked. So I'm looking for you guys to be engaged. If there's something you don't know, ask for it. The whole session, we'll talk about food safety, we'll talk about agro-processing a little bit, organic, and then GAP. We won't cover everything. Again, it's a long session, but we'll try to cover as much of the big topics as we can. Remember, food safety is a shared responsibility. So it's not my job or Latoya's job or somebody else's job. It's all of us, whether we're at home, whether we're in the farm, whether we're in the schools. it's all about maintaining the safety of our food. As farmers, we are the #1 stop for food safety. As homeowners, as school, we are key in ensuring the safety of our food. Okay? Without further ado, we can start. I am going to probably turn off my video while I talk, so it's not distracting, but I'll be here, we have questions, and I'll come back again. So before we get started, is there any burning question anybody have, or before we get started? No? Okay. So Latoya, if you want to start with the slides, then we can get started from there. I look forward to you guys. I'm so glad you made the time to be with us. Okay, we can go through. And by the way, I know I'm 1 day or 2 days late, but happy Independence to St. Kitts Nevis. Hope you guys had, and you can go to the next slide. It's yeah. Hope you guys had a great Independence. And just an FYI, September is Food Safety Training Month. So this just happened to coincide that we're doing a food safety training. So what to expect? For this session, which is 10, we'll talk about food safety culture, the basic principles of food safety. We'll talk about foodborne illness and microorganisms, and we'll touch on kitchen and personal hygiene. Then you all have your journal, and in there you have a farm food safety plan. If you have not looked at it, I want you guys to go through it and read it and put in as much information for your farm if you have one, or look as much as you can, and we'll go through that in session 2. What we've done in the past, which has worked, is we try to get 2 volunteers to summarize 2 or 3 key learnings from the prior session. So if we can get 2 people, 1 or 2, we like 2, because you get different perspectives. At the session on that session 11, if we can get 2 people to volunteer to summarize the key learnings, then we'll give Latoya your name, and then we can do the key learnings at the following session. Okay, anybody wants to volunteer with the thing, either use raise hand, or you can speak out, and Latoya will take your name down, and at our next section, we would be excited to have you summarize the key learnings. So the thing I forgot to tell you, if you don't volunteer, then you'll be voluntold. So anyone? Latoya, we have anybody volunteering?
Unfortunately, no. So you might have to voluntold.
All right, so I'm gonna go into the participant list. Come on, guys. I know you can do it. It's easy. It's just say who, what 3 things that you learned, and you learn a lot. All right.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I need 2 people to sign up for giving a summary or 2 or 3 key learnings from each session. So when we meet next session, before we start, 2 people will start by telling what are the things they learned from the prior session, from this session. All right, so I'm gonna pick then. I'm gonna pick Claudia Otley. Claudia, that was just random. And you feel free to decline, but I'll put your name down. Is Claudia there? No?
We do have 2 volunteers. We have Akisha Fergus and Shiana Edgin.
Thank you, ladies.
Edgins,
Thank you so much. All right, so again, just get 3 of the key learnings that you had that you can share with your classmates. Okay, thank you. All right, next slide. In session 11, we'll continue with kitchen and personal hygiene. Then on the second session, we'll talk a lot about the good agricultural practices. Then we'll talk about your farm food safety plan. And I included a section which I normally don't put, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between agro-processing and food manufacturing and farm food safety. Next slide. And in section 12, we'll talk about organic versus natural. We'll talk about various certification. Now I put foreign supplier verification because in the past, the students have been interested in what to do if I want to import, export food across, especially to Europe or to the US. And we'll talk a little about that if time permits. So those are the 3 sessions that will be the topics we'll be covering for those sessions. Next slide. So what are your learning objectives for today? The learning objectives is about food safety culture, its role in producing safe food. We'll talk about microorganisms, foodborne pathogens, you'll learn about that. The main food safety hazard. You learn about kitchen and personal hygiene, which is a precursor to farm food safety. And you learn how to use tools in the kitchen to prevent foodborne illness. So some of the key learning objectives. Next slide. So in between, I also will have, a lot of you may have seen Jeopardy. So the question, you get a list of topics, you get some questions, you pick the answer, and then you have to phrase it back in a form of a question. So we're gonna use that Jeopardy style to help us interact. This one is an example that we'll do. Latoya, if you can try it and see if it goes, then we can start there. This is just intro to it. Latoya, can you open it?
Okay. It's actually 1 second. Deputy.
Okay, great. So if you go back, we look at practice. And if we click on
Practice.
so we have hygiene, practice, hygiene, kitchen prep, microorganism, and miscellaneous. So you would pick any of those topics, and then you would pick a number value, so 100, 400, 300, and then a question will show up. So do the practice and click on the 100, and we'll see what it looks like. So the answer is Kitlin Carew. So the question would be, anybody want to take a guess?
Who is the director of Helen's Daughters?
Yes, he was the executive director or founder of Helen's Daughters. So continue. So that's how it works. It's pretty simple. And then you could go on, we can do one and do a 500 on practice. I don't know if there's a question on there, but I think there might be. So it links agriculture production with tourism to attract visitors to farmers. You haven't touched that yet, but the question would be, what is agro-tourism? You guys get it? Any questions on those? So I will have those to break down during the session, just to give us a check-in. Good?
Okay.
All right. All right, we can get out of this one. Yeah. So food safety culture. What is a food safety culture? Go to the next slide, Latoya. Culture is a way of life for an entire community. So you heard it, it's not new. It's just like everything else. You heard the word culture, and we'll talk about the next slide. It's a way of life, it's the way we do things. Latoya, next slide. So if you can give me, again, you can mute yourself. You can either type it in the chat or you can speak up. Give me an example of some, name some example of SKN culture. So what do you think is a culture for your community? Anyone? I was told you guys that eating black pudding from Jody. Yes, eating black pudding is an example of culture in SKN. I personally, I used to like black pudding, and then I learned about food safety, and I don't eat black pudding again. So maybe after I finish, it might not be a good culture for SKN. All right, that's a good one, but thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else wants to give an example of SKN culture? Goat water. Tell me more about goat water. What is goat water? Don, food we eat that goes from generation to generation, passed on like parts of us. Now it can be said. Yes, those are all great examples of the culture. But cook up. All right, somebody will have to tell me later about goat water. Oh yeah, you muted me. Okay, I unmuted myself. All right, great. Next slide. Thank you, all of you, for giving me those examples. So here's some I pulled out that's common to not only SKN, but also to the Caribbean. So the first one is carnival. We all have carnival that is passed down for generations. We enjoy it and so on. We go to the beach is a big part of us in the Caribbean. Fishing is a big part. Uniforms, right? It's another area that all our school kids go with uniform. Not everybody has uniform to go to school, but in the Caribbean, that's one thing that's our culture. Everybody goes to wears uniform. And then we all are very religious. We believe in doing a lot of herbal medicines, bay leaves, ginger, turmeric. We believe in all of those culture that's to SKN and also in part to the Caribbean. So next slide. So food safety culture is not any different. It's shared values, it's a belief and norms that affect mindset, behavior towards food safety in, across, and throughout an organization. So that's the formal definition of food safety culture. But if you think about all those examples that you just mentioned about your culture, how they come about, it's a habit, it's something that we do, it's something that's ingrained in us. Food safety culture is the same thing, and we have to learn how to create a food safety culture in home, at work, so we can ensure the safety and sustainable of our food supply. Next slide. So here's another, again, I forgot, I'm gonna be a little bit interactive so we can make sure that we are staying awake. So here are some statements, and you guys can either use the chat or you can speak up or say something. Which statement does not reflect a food safety culture? A, all employees and owners are trained in food safety. B, all employees wash hands after using the bathroom. Hand washing is not always necessary on the farm because we are handling dirt. And food safety culture is a shared responsibility. So either you can use the chat feature or you can put your hands up and Latoya, if you can help us get some of those answers. So which one do you say is the right one? Somebody said C, 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 C. Anybody else? C, yeah. C. Yes, C. Hand washing is not always necessary on the farm because we are handling dirt. That is a true statement. We always need to wash our hands when we are handling ready to eat food. So C is correct. See, I know you guys were a really smart group. Next slide. Next one. So we go to the basic principles of food safety. So food safety has 4 steps. When you think of food safety, it's 4 steps. It's clean, separate, cook, and chill. And that applies to a lot of the things that you're gonna hear today. So it's clean it, separate it, cook it, and chill it. Next slide. So we talk about hazards in food safety, and they are biological, chemical, physical, and chemical. So those are the 3 big topics we're gonna cover today when we talk about food safety hazards. Biological, physical, chemical. We'll spend a lot of time on the biological side because that's the one that's predominantly creating food safety issues, but we also talk about physical and chemical. Next slide. Foodborne illness and microorganisms. Next one. So food poisoning or foodborne illness is an infection or irritation of the gastrointestinal, so basically inside your GI tract. It can be caused by food or beverage that contains harmful bacteria, parasite, viruses, or chemicals. Food poisoning, you can click a couple of those. The number 1 cause of food poisoning is the improper cooking and storage of food. Poor hygiene comes in second. So not cooking your food properly, which is an advantage for us in the Caribbean, because a lot of the Caribbean, we cook the heck out of our food. We don't eat medium rare food. We cook it till there's nothing in it. The people of the highest risk of dying from food poisoning are the young children and the elderly, because their immune system is not as strong. Next slide. So the symptoms of, you can click again. The general symptoms you'll see is nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Is there one more? And abdominal pain. So most people who get food poisoning survive it. The only thing is, if you ever had food poisoning, which I've had a couple times, unfortunately, is it doesn't kill you, it just makes you wish you were dead when you have a bad case of it. Next slide. So unsafe food causes about 600 million cases of foodborne illness per year. Think about that, 600 million cases of foodborne illnesses per year, 420,000 deaths, if you can imagine, and 30% of foodborne deaths occur in children, which is devastating. Next slide. So here's another one. We talk about food safety in the Caribbean as if it's not that big a deal. And we might say, when I talk to people in the Caribbean, it's like, well, that's not really happening to us. Can anybody guess how many cases of foodborne illness per year occur in the Caribbean? I'm not talking about just SKN, we're talking about the Caribbean. Anybody? Now, as you think about it, in the Caribbean, it's gonna be much, much lower because it's not reported. When you think about when you get sick, how many of us have a place to report? We don't have a place to report. So Sheridan has one in every 49 person, 100. Yes, Sheridan, you got it right. Okay, 1 in 49 or 142 is the number that is reported for the Caribbean. I believe this number is way lower because our system of reporting, unlike the developed countries, is very, very poor, and we don't report it. We don't have a way to record it or report it. So I think this number is underreported. Thank you. Next one. So what do you do if you suspect you have food poisoning? Okay. You can click through it. Latoya. So drink plenty of fluids, practice good hygiene, don't spray it around. Most people recover on their own without treatment. Sick, drink charcoal. Okay, from Sheridan, drink charcoal. Medical help, if you have bloody diarrhea, avoid over-the-counter medicine. And the reason it says avoid over-the-counter medicine, because when you have foodborne illness, there's no cure for foodborne illness. I know we take Pepto-Bismol, we take all of those things. It's actually, it makes us feel bad, but it's actually worse for us because once we have, and you'll hear about it, a foodborne illness, it's better for us to let the toxin or whatever is causing us sick to flush itself out of our system. Most of those medicine is delaying the symptoms because it's causing the symptoms to stop, but it's not flushing out the toxin. So foodborne illness, there's not really a cure for it. You can treat the symptoms. Some people get dehydrated, so you have to go to the hospital and get fluids. Some people get damaged through their kidneys. We had a lot of cases where the kids get E. coli poisoning and they have to be treated, but foodborne illness by itself is not treatable. The symptoms can last from a few hours or a week, and it all depends on if you have an infection or an intoxication, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the process. So let's go now over to microorganisms. We talked about foodborne illness. Let's talk about microorganisms. And I know all of you are familiar with the microorganisms, but we'll go through them quickly. So when we look at microorganisms, I like to categorize them as the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's not all microorganisms are created equal. So we have the good, the bad, the ugly. So the good ones are the ones that we use in our wine to ferment beer. It gives us the gut health from the microflora. We use it to make cheese. And of course, familiar, the penicillin is made from mold. So those are the good microorganisms that we need. The bad ones are, they cause spoilage, but they don't make you sick. So you have mold is the big one, and yeast that will sour your milk, or lactics, or cause browning. And actually, you can cut those out. Like if you have a moldy piece of bread, it's okay to cut the piece that's moldy out if you don't mind it being disgusting, and eating the rest that's not moldy, because most molds are not toxic. Protozoas, yes. Right? Now we have the ones that we are concerned about is the ugly, or what we call the dangerous microorganisms. So they are either viruses or bacteria. And we'll talk about each of them as we go through. There are hepatitis, salmonella, and listeria. Listeria being the latest one when it comes to pathogen. You may have heard of it, but you may not. But it's our newest microorganism, and I'll tell you why it's important. So we call those pathogenic microorganisms because they can make you sick, and they do not change your food. So the food will look perfectly fine. They don't smell in some cases. There's no symptoms that it's there. So keep going. So in food, we might say you can get sick two ways. You can get sick through a food infection and a food intoxication. So infection refers to the presence of the bacteria which infects the body after consumption. So if you have salmonella poisoning, you have to have a food that has the microorganism in it. You eat that contaminated food because it doesn't have any symptoms. You will not know it has microorganism in it. And then once you get it, it grows inside of you, produces a number of 10 to the 6, about 1 million, because they grow really fast. And then you get sick, you start seeing the symptoms. Those are a little longer to eat, so you will not get sick right away. And so most people, when they get food poisoning, they go automatically to something they ate right away. Sometimes it's something you ate 2 or 3 days ago, and that's an infection. An intoxication is you ingesting the toxin which contained within the food, and those are E. coli could be one of them. They produce a toxin outside, you eat the toxin, and then you get sick. A good one is Clostridium botulism, produces a toxin which is very, very, very dangerous. It's said that you put 1 teaspoon in the water supply of the US can affect the entire population of New York. So the toxin that it's produced, it causes paralysis, and it's a very dangerous one. And you get it, a lot of the food poisoning is not as common anymore, but you get it when you do home canning, or if you get food, like a canned food that's under process and it's swelling, then you have toxin in there, and those can be deadly. So those are the two. You can have food infection, food intoxication. Food infection, you have to eat the bacteria, it grows inside of you. Food intoxication, the bacteria doesn't necessarily have to be present for you to eat. Another food intoxication, the organism itself is not pathogen. It's found in our hand. It's called Staphylococcus aureus, or staph. It produces a toxin which cannot be killed by cooking. So you can cook the food, unlike the botulism, you can cook that, but in the staph, it will survive the cooking, and that can make you sick. Another one is bacillus, which is produced in rice. When you cook rice and you leave it on the stove, it produces the toxin, the bacteria dies, but that toxin can make you sick. Okay, next slide. So we'll look at some sources of that. We all use chicken, and we'll talk about a lot about chicken during this course. Raw chicken is the #1 cause of food poisoning. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happened, touching of it, undercooking the chicken. And I know for you guys, you grow up and you hear people say, don't eat, when you eat the chicken, if you see red, that's a bad sign, but there's a lot more to just that. And we'll talk about why chicken is a big issue and how it causes foodborne poisoning. Next slide. The second leading cause of foodborne poisoning is salmonella. We talked about that. It's raw or undercooked foods such as eggs, chicken, raw cookie dough. We talk about cake batter. The kids will lick the bowl. I know if you make cake, the kids pass because it's good. They take a lick. I say to be careful because a lick might be your last. Cereal, ready-to-eat cereal. I worked for Kellogg, and right before I retired, we had a major recall of our ready-to-eat cereal. Lucky for us, nobody died, but we had a number of illnesses. And some of that cereal made it to the Caribbean, to our shelves, because we recalled it. But what happens, I find, is when you have a food in the US that's sold outside of the US and you have a recall, the process of removing the foods on the shelf outside of the US is very inefficient, right? And it is hard to get it off the shelf. So you find out that when I came back to St. Lucia about a year after that cereal recall, I was still finding cereal from that lot on the shelf. So we have to be very careful about the food that we import. Somebody had a question, let me see, about what's the opinion on washing meat? I will talk about that. The answer is don't wash it. I know that's a culture that is very, very hard for us to buy because we are grown to believe that we have to wash and clean our food, but then we'll see why we don't wash it. No washing of your raw meat. I know a few of you are saying, what? But no washing. We'll talk about it a little longer. Thank you, Jody, for that question. We'll get to that. Okay, so salmonella, you hear a lot about salmonella, chicken, and ready-to-eat foods, cereals, flour, we'll talk about that, and eggs. Next one. Next slide. So some of the signs of salmonella infection, again, very similar to the other ones. So it's stomach cramp, nausea, fever, vomiting, chills, and diarrhea. So this, I call this a 2-bucket disease, as you go in at both ends. Sometimes you have a 1 bucket where it's just one side. Salmonella is a 2-bucket disease. E. coli, again, E. coli is another organism. I call it the poop organism because you find it from feces and from people not washing their hands, from animals crossing into your farm to get ready to eat. And it's on underground meat products. So E. coli became very famous or infamous because there was a major recall where the restaurant did not cook their food. They gave the raw hamburger, even though there was regulations to say that you have to cook the meat. So when you eat hamburgers, people like to eat raw hamburgers. Please do not do that. Make sure your hamburger is cooked to 150, 165 or more, no pink. And why the hamburgers are harder? Because you get the feces from the animal, the ground beef, it's all mixed up. And so whatever you had on the outside is now mixed into the ground beef. And if you don't cook it to that internal temperature, then it will cause you to be sick. Now, for those of you who have Netflix, a movie just came out called Poisoned. And I would recommend that you guys take the time to watch it. Poison, it's about the problem that happened with the kids eating it was from Jack in the Box, eating the undercooked food. And that caused a lot of the changes that we see now in the regulations in the US that cause people to monitor their food and a lot of farm work on that side. So I recommend that if you have access to it, take a minute and watch the movie. It came out earlier this year. It's called Poison. I know a lot of the candidates, a lot of the players in there, but it's something that you probably should take a look and watch with you and your family. It's hard to watch, but it's something, it's good.
We have one question in the chat from Jody Tickley. She's asking, what's your opinion on washing meats?
Oh, I addressed that. I said no washing of the meat, and I will address it a little later. Did you guys hear me? I saw that, I answered it already. Yeah? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I answered. All right, so that was E. coli. The signs again, go back. E. coli has a stomach cramp, nausea, fever. Go back, one more, yeah. Vomiting, bloody diarrhea. And again, I said E. coli is very, very dangerous because it affects your kidney, and then this one actually can kill you. And we had a couple of deaths because of that one. When I say we, I mean in the outbreak, in the US, a lot of kids. And that's also from produce. Somebody asked a question about produce, ready to eat, lettuce and those things. Again, those because of cross-contamination on the farm. And we'll talk a little more about that too as we go ahead. Keep going. Listeria is another pathogen. Listeria is new, fairly new, when I say new, because it grows in the refrigerator. And I remember when it first came out, we had, and it's in soft cheeses, we had a number of the brie cheese and the soft cheeses. And in the lab, we were using it to test. And somebody stole the food from the lab. And when we put a note out and saying what was in it and the symptom, the next day they brought it back. But this is critical because that organism can grow in refrigeration unlike any other organism. And the number one person it infects, it's pregnant women, and it causes abortion. So if you are working, if you are a childbearing age, if you are pregnant, when we work in the lab, people who are childbearing age or pregnant, we make sure they stay out of the lab. They don't drink raw milk because Listeria will cause you to abort your baby. Sprout is a good one. When you go to restaurants and then they sprinkle sprout on your salad, it may look nice, but make sure you tell them to hold the sprout because that's a true sign. You can't get rid of them what's in there. The other thing is cold cut is a big one because it's refrigerated, it's cold in there, and most of the time it's not cleaned. And so you have the Listeria growing. Again, you can't tell it's contaminated, but it can cause illness. Okay, next slide. We talked about Clostridium botulism. Again, it produces the toxin. It causes paralysis, basically. So if you guys know, when we talk about people in Hollywood getting Botox, that's what they're using, which is very dangerous. They're using botulism toxin to basically paralyze their wrinkles and their faces. So when you see somebody with Botox, you'll see that they can't move their faces. And so that's basically what they're using. They're using the bot toxin, which is really, really dangerous. You don't want to do that. And for us in the Caribbean, we have to be careful because when we grow food, we do a lot of home canning. And home canning is dangerous because what you are doing is you're driving out the oxygen and you're leaving it in what we call an anaerobic condition. And the bacteria can grow in there and produce the toxin. The good news is, because it produces a lot of gas, it will cause the top of those cans or the jars to swell. So you will see it. So if anybody gives you a canned food and they open it, it swells, it doesn't smell, and you want to taste it, do not taste it because it might be your last taste. So we'll have, don't taste food, don't smell food, just to test if it's quality. If you think it's contaminated, it's bad, when in doubt, throw out. Okay, next slide. So again, infant botulism, I put that in there. It's not that common, but I think I remember growing up that we used to give our kids honey and they give kids honey. So infant botulism is different than regular botulism. It's found, the cause of Clostridium botulism is found in honey. And as adults, it doesn't affect us. But in kids, if we give them kids a year or 1 year or younger, their system is not developed enough to break down the botulism. So it stays and it colonizes their system and they get infant botulism. It's probably more prevalent than we know. If we say kids die in their sleep, we don't know why, but just be aware that that's a risk. Giving kids a year or younger honey, raw honey, because that can cause a problem. I know people, when kids are teething, they probably rub some honey on their teeth to soothe it. Just be careful. Next slide. So the honey rule is infants under age 1 should not be fed honey or any food containing honey. Okay, next slide. So this was microbial hazard. We went through it quickly. Chemical hazards, again, next slide, is another key hazard. And some of those are pesticides that we all use, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about good agricultural practices. Next slide. One of the big ones is food allergies. And it's the number 1 cause of illness in the US and the rest of the world that monitor it. A lot of you may have food allergies. One second. Amanda has a question. Why shouldn't you give children honey under 1 year? The reason why you shouldn't give them honey, because honey contains botulism spores that the kid's system, the internal digestive system, cannot break it down. And then it colonizes their inside, causing them to produce the toxin, which then causes paralysis and death. Okay? Let's go back to food allergies, like I said. So the number 1 food allergy is peanuts. Then you have seafood allergies. And I have my niece, she's allergic, very allergic. Her dad had peanuts. He washed his mouth, or so he thought, and he went and kissed her, and then she broke into hives, and lucky, because they know that, they had EpiPen and they were able to get it. Peanut allergies is so severe, a little bit can cause death. And when people have allergies, it causes it shuts down your immune system and you can't breathe. And if you're not treated quickly, it can lead to death. So food allergies, I know we probably don't do a lot of it in the Caribbean. We had a recall in Brazil where we had a cross-contamination with peanuts. And we had to fight with the Brazilian government because they told us that people in Brazil don't have allergies. But unfortunately, because of the world that we live in, people from everywhere travel. And if you have cross-contamination, if you have an allergic reaction to food, it can be deadly. So if you are in the process of making agro-processing, make sure that you are not cross-contaminating those raw nuts with other foods. Strawberries on there, it's not really an allergy, it's more like a sensitivity, but some people have strong sensitivity to it. Eggs is another allergy. So gluten is not an allergic reaction, it's a sensitivity. So gluten-free is people who cannot tolerate flour, and then they get the same kind of symptoms as allergic people. So food allergies can be big. And there's a list of the top 8, now they expanded to top 10. I can provide that for you if you need it. Okay? Next slide, Latoya. Physical hazards is the next hazard, and it's, keep going. Physical hazard, it doesn't cause illness, but it can cause harm. So it's like matchstick, stones, stems, seeds, hair, bone fragments, nails. So when you see, if you have your farm that you don't want to have thick nails because it can cause a problem, jewelry and nails. It can also be if you are making agro-processing, if you're making jams and jellies and you have strawberry or mangoes or something else, the pit from the fruit can also be a hazard because it can cause damage to your teeth. We had another situation where we had a strainer in the line that broke and they didn't see it. And it caused pieces of the wire to be found in the cereal. and we went to the government and said, hey, the pieces are too small, they're not gonna cause a problem, but we got rejected, which we kind of knew. It's even though it was small, if ingested, and that piece of wire can go inside and damage your intestine and your organs. So because of that, that food had to be recalled. So physical hazard, it doesn't causes diarrhea or anything, but it can cause damage to your teeth and to potentially your insides. So be careful about that. Next slide. So I spoke for about an hour. Now it's time for us to test our knowledge. We'll try our Jeopardy lab. Unless there's any questions you want me to take right now, I will do that instead of that. So which one? If I don't see any questions, we'll go straight to the Jeopardy. So we did microorganisms and miscellaneous. You can pick from either one of those. Anybody wants to take a category? We just did microorganisms, so somebody can go in there.
200.
Microorganism 200, thank you. Under processed canned food. What do you think the answer is? The question. You want to take a guess? We talked about canning and botulism, for example. What is?
Clostridium botulism.
All right, let's see if you're right. Press the space bar to reveal your answer. So under processed canned food. Clostridium botulism is right because that's what's gonna happen. That's the source. What is the source of botulism? Yep, very good. One more. Anybody else?
Or is it like 1,100?
Collect once 100. The good, the bad, the ugly. I didn't know you, Paulette.
Microorganism.
What a microorganism. Let's go see. What is the fun way to categorize microorganism? Very good. You guys got this. All right. What about shrimp? What about shrimp is allergy? Judy, I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking is shrimp an allergy? It's a seafood allergy. Is that the question? Judy Ann, what about shrimp is allergy? Yes, shrimp is, it's a seafood allergy. It causes the same symptoms that an immune response that causes your face and your system to shut down. It's just as bad as peanut allergy. Okay, great. Next slide. We can move on. I know I went through those a little bit fast, but again, it's in there. So let's go back to, now that you know the basic principles, let's go back to see how that applies to you and talk about kitchen hygiene. So if you can play that little video, I wanted to start with a little bit of a video and we'll see a little bit on that. Latoya, can you try to see if we can get the video to work?
All right, let's try this now.
So this is going to be a little bit about, and I found it on the internet, but I think it's a good way to introduce the kitchen hygiene. Again, those are not new. Those are common sense ways of looking at it. But if you don't think about it, then you don't realize it.
One second, please. Let
Yeah.
me pull
If
up
you
the-
guys have any question while Latoya is bringing that up, again, when we talk about kitchen hygiene, we'll talk about cross-contamination. We'll talk a little bit about washing, to wash or not to wash meats, and personal hygiene. And it gives you a different perspective or when you think about food. Can you press play? I
Let me
think
know if
that
you're hearing it, please.
I think it's muted. Okay. I cannot hear it. Huh. Can you guys hear it? Because it has no sound.
No.
One second, let me try this again.
Yeah. So basically what you're gonna see, it's talking about kitchen hygiene and bacteria that you can't see. In this case, they use something called glow germ. And it shows you how, when you wash chicken, how fast the microorganism can spread to unsuspected surfaces.
Kitchens do a lot of work for our families. Meals are prepared, drinks are poured and spilled, and there's always plenty to clean and wash. However, rinsing raw poultry contaminates your kitchen with harmful bacteria like Salmonella. Bacteria is aerosolized with water when you rinse your chicken, which means that bacteria can travel beyond what you can see. When you can keep bacteria from spreading, you make the kitchen as clean as possible. This is especially important for the high-risk members of our family, loved ones who are younger and older, or those with poor immune systems. If they get a foodborne illness, they're more likely to be hospitalized or become very ill. Don't rinse your chicken. Don't cross-contaminate. Keep raw juice and chicken away from other foods and kitchen items, and cook thoroughly to at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, we can stop it, Latoya. So that is basically kitchen
Hi,
hygiene
Lisa. How are you on this?
in a sense. And we'll talk about it more to what it means to us. But I wanted to give you a little bit of that. And somebody had something in the chat, I thought a question. I can't see it. I thought I saw something, but I didn't, about should we wash chicken, but maybe my imagination. Okay. So imagine you go into somebody, your friend invites you to a picnic, you go in there, you see the table is set, you enjoying the dinner, you turn around, and that actually happened to me. And you go in the back, and you go to the kitchen, and what do you see? Turn the next slide. You see this. Can you go to the next slide? And you see this, right?
Oh,
Can you imagine how you feel after you eat the food? Remember I said, food that is contaminated with bacteria cannot be seen, you cannot smell it, it tastes, it feels good, and you eat it. But when you see this, what you want to do is throw up. So me, when I go to people, first of all, I don't eat out that much. When I do go out, it's people I know, or if I go to a restaurant, the first thing I do is try to go back in the kitchen and see what's happening around that. And then when I buy my food, I eat everything well done. So this is about kitchen hygiene. This is about how we handle it. It's common sense, but when you see the number of illnesses, people forget sometimes that they are dealing with food, and they forget that bacteria, although it cannot be seen with the naked eye, can be very harmful. Somebody say, bless and eat and don't go in the kitchen. I agree with you, Antoinette. That's my motto. Next slide. So I want you to spot the hazard. So if you go in this kitchen, how many hazards can you spot? You can either speak up or then put it in the chat. Let's see how many hazards you can spot.
The garbage is piled up.
The garbage, yes. Which other one can you see? The roaches, yes. Why is
Dirty
roaches?
container on the stove.
Somebody saw 11, Shridan said 11 times. Raw meat on the counter with fruits and veggies, yes. Big fruits next to the raw meat. Yeah, raw meat.
The
Let me ask
sponge
you a
on the
question.
counter.
On the counter. Don't wash your chicken. Did I hear you correctly? Yes. Don't wash your chicken. And the reason why, we'll talk about it, but since everybody's interested in it, everything wrong in here. Raw meat lying next to the counter. So let me ask you a question. Why is the roach a problem? Besides the fact that it's disgusting, why is it a problem?
Because he's walking on everything and tracking the germs all over.
Exactly. I hate flies. We forget about this fly thing. In the Caribbean, we have flies over everything. It drives me nuts. But when you think about flies, they're sitting on every germ you can think of. And though, if you were to look at the legs of the roaches and the flies and see the amount of bacteria, if you think about it, it drives me crazy when we see flies and roaches. Flies worse than roaches, but the flies are everywhere. And in the Caribbean, when we go out, we see a lot of flies. And I get paranoid about it because I think of fly, I think the fly is just taking a little bit of poop and putting it on my food. So we have to try to keep those away. So yes, so you guys got all of the hazards. Go back to the next slide, it just points out everything. I think you got all of it. So we got the roach, we got the sponge. And again, the reason the sponge is a problem, why is the sponge bad? Because a lot of us use sponges. Why is sponge bad?
Sponges hold a lot of bacteria.
Exactly. And then what do we do with the sponge?
We wipe the surfaces, spreading all the bacteria around.
Exactly. And if you were to put that glow germ on it, our face and everywhere else, we just spread it around. The stuff leaking out of the refrigerator, contamination, the garbage cans, the dirt on the dishes. The big one here is the cross-contamination with the meat and the vegetables, because raw food contains bacteria naturally. But most of the times it's okay because you're gonna cook it to an internal temperature of 165, but you are not cooking the fruits and the vegetables, and you don't see the bacteria. So think about that in your house. Think about that when you go out to eat. Think about that when you go to the park. So I've never been to SKN, but I doubt they're any different than St. Lucia or the other places. When you go out to those festivals, like you just had your independence celebration, and we have all the street vendors, how many of them have hand wash stations? How many bathrooms are available? And do you think about what is happening? Where are those people washing their hands? How am I getting my food clean? Right? So not only at home, but outside, the way you look at vendors. Because of my flora, I probably get sick the minute I eat something because I don't eat anything unless I see a lot of fire burning the fish or whatever I'm eating, because you can never be too careful because people handle money is another one again. When you think about money and how it passes from one hand to the other, if you go to a restaurant and the people are handling the money and the food, that's another hazard. So you have to be aware of it. Don't be like me and be paranoid, but be aware. And then it's what is the role that you can play for your families as you look into your kitchen? And then also what happens when you go to your farm and when you sell food in the market, and then you as a consumer. So always think about food is something somebody's going to eat that can be deadly, and how we prepare it. We cannot see it, but it's there. Okay, next slide. So improper food storage, again, it sounds like common sense, but sometimes we don't do it. And especially you think the restaurants would do that, they don't. Is how do you store food? Go to the next slide. So on this side, what's wrong with the first one? The storage, improper storage. What's wrong in that first slide in the refrigerator?
The chicken is
Lorenzo?
uncovered.
The chicken is uncovered, yes. What else?
Missing the date.
Missing the date, yes. What else?
The chicken's supposed to be in the freezer?
Not really. If you're gonna use it and you want to thaw it out, that's the best way to thaw it out. But what's wrong with it though? Why is it wrong there? The chicken and the fish.
It's with vegetables, I'm seeing, I'm not sure.
It's what?
It's with all the stuff, is it? Oh, all the meat are on one shot? I'm not sure what I'm seeing.
You're close. Money for close. Think again. Just look at it a little closely. What can happen to the chicken as it thaws out?
Oh, it
Chicken
leaks.
is
It
rest,
leaks,
yes,
yeah.
it's resting
So it
on
leaks.
something.
And
Yes.
what happened? What is it going to leak onto?
The vegetable.
Right, and the vegetables are most likely going to be eaten raw. And even you washing doesn't get rid of the pathogen. It's really, really hard once it's contaminated to get rid of it. So when you're going to store your food, first you have to label it. Then you have to make sure that you are storing the vegetables at the top shelf. The meat and the salmon, because they are raw, and I will tell you in a little bit that you should defrost your food in the refrigerator in cold water or in the microwave, not on your countertop. And then if you are going to thaw it, put it in the bottom shelf, right? We had, in my other life, we had to fight with the manufacturers of refrigerator to make sure that they don't put the fruit crispers in the bottom, that they try to redesign it. So you'll see some refrigerators now, the designs are very different because the manufacturers also are part of keeping our food safe. The old ones, all the crispers were in the bottom. Now the newer ones, they are moving them to the top. Okay, so those are some chemical factors on how you store your food. That also applies when you are shopping. So when you shop and you go out to shop, I know I see it a lot, the fish in the market, we don't have proper refrigeration to store our fish. And we travel a long way with the meats before it can get refrigerated. So again, we need to be very careful. If you are going to shop, make sure you are separating the food. Remember, the first is separate, right? Chill, cook. Next slide. So I gave you, I defrost in a tray. Tracy, a tray where? Where is that tray? On the shelf?
In the fridge.
In the fridge, yes. Now, my husband and he likes to cook, and he drives me nuts. He's from Jamaica. And he puts the food on the shelf to defrost it. And I turn around, I put it back in the refrigerator. I cannot get him to put food in the refrigerator to defrost. It's a cultural thing. We don't do that because you grow up. When I came back from St. Lucia and after school, my grandmother used to tell me, it never killed you before. Why you want to come and tell me it's going to kill you now? So it's really hard, right? But we have to learn and we have to understand why. So this I gave you, you can print it out and you can put it on your refrigerator. It's a place of how to use, what temperature your food should be and where you can keep it, right? The danger zone, we see that little yellow zone, that's where the bacteria will grow and multiply. So you want to keep your food out of there. In the refrigerated zone, the bacteria don't grow except for Listeria in that case, which will survive, but most bacteria don't grow in that area. So if you want, when you get your slides, you can print that copy and put it on your shelf as a reminder. And if you have a farm, you can also put it there because it applies the same place. Next slide. So we talked a lot about food safety. Eating raw batter or dough, we talked about it. Can somebody tell me why that's a problem?
The raw egg could have bacteria in it.
The raw eggs could have bacteria. What about the dough?
Yeah, the dough too.
And which part of the dough has the bacteria? The flour, right? Now, there was a big recall of flour recently. Now, I think that they shouldn't have recalled the flour. I think people should not eat raw flour. We know raw flour has bacteria. So if somebody wants to go and eat dough or they want to take flour and use it raw, there's so much hunger in the world. The flour is intended to be baked. And that company had to throw out so much flour because it had salmonella, and some people used it on ready-to-eat food. They didn't cook it as intended. But you have to be careful with flour. If it's not baked, it is a risk. Do not eat the dough, do not spread it on raw food, do not drizzle it on anything because they have a high rate of salmonella on them. Same thing with the batter mix. Don't lick your batter. I know as growing up, there's something people do, it tastes good. But again, eating the raw batter can be dangerous. What about sunny side up eggs from Tracy?
Sorry, we have
Living on the sunny side eggs is living on the edge. Again, no sunny side egg. It has salmonella on it. And it has to be cooked. Now, thawing and marinated food on the, you can go back. Next one is guess the food safety list. Next one.
sorry, we have a hand raised.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, you said that the raw dough, it's only safe when it's baked. But what about when you cooking it with your as a dumpling for your soup?
Well, when I say baked, I mean cooked. So bake it, cook it, as long as it has a temperature processing, don't eat it raw.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, your dumplings is safe. I love dumplings. But again, when you bake the dumplings on the countertop, make sure that you are cleaning that properly so you're not spreading the flour, just like the chicken. The flour is easier because you can see it. And so you can clean it, but the raw flour is what you don't eat. Okay, next one. Next slide. The other direction. No, back, there we go. So guess the food safety hazard on the storing or marinating meat on the counter or kitchen top. We talked about that. Can somebody tell me what the hazard of that is?
The heat would cause the bacteria to multiply and grow.
Yes. So that when you remember that temperature we talked about at room temperature, even if you marinate it, we have sometimes we think the marination causes a preservatives kind of, but not necessarily because it's not all the way on the inside yet. And at room temperature, the bacteria will grow, and then you have the juices that you can spread and contaminate, right? And you cannot necessarily see it. So we have to do it in the refrigerator. It takes a little longer. And somebody said, well, it doesn't get fully defrosted. But that's okay because the outside itself that gets defrosted has enough bacteria to cause you to be sick. Next slide. Tasting and smelling food for quality. I don't know, you have sometimes somebody will look at the food and say, that doesn't feel good. You want to taste it? Please don't let that person be your friend. Because remember, you cannot see it. It will taste perfectly fine. If you can smell food, sour food, remember we said that's the bad bacteria, that doesn't make you sick. It's the ones that you cannot smell. That food, that chicken will look fine, but you won't know that it's salmonella. Food that has pathogens in it, most of the time, 90% of the time, will look perfectly fine, smell perfectly fine. Remember I told you about rice? And they call it the Chinese syndrome now, but in the diverse world, we're not supposed to call it that anymore. When you cook rice, we went to a wedding and one of the people brought the rice. It was a big, big container of rice. And by the time the wedding was over, everybody except the bride and groom was throwing up and sick and bad. Because what happened is they cooked the rice, a big pot. And rice, you know, how many people leave rice on the counter? A lot of people leave cooked rice. But what happened is when you cook the rice, you had a spore-forming bacteria called bacillus. The bacillus produced the toxin. The rice cools down slowly and allows that toxin to grow. And then the rice became contaminated. It was perfectly fine. It was still warm. People ate it. And the ride home was not a fun ride. It was horrible. So once you cook rice, first, if you cook a big pot of rice, separate them out in small containers. Do not let it cool down on the countertop. Either keep it above 165 or cool it down right away.
Okay, we have a question in the chat.
I didn't hear that, Latoya.
So we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Terry and Morton is asking, we tend to defrost frozen meats, season, then freeze again. What are your thoughts?
So we tend to defrost frozen meat, season them, freeze them again, and what are your thoughts? So you can thaw the meat as long as you thaw it in the refrigerator, in cold water for a short period of time, or in a microwave. So defrosting the meat is fine. It's just not letting it sit around at room temperature to allow the bacteria to grow. And you can freeze it again, not a problem, as long as it was not abused. Sheridan, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. The key here is not to let the bacteria have time to grow on it. Next slide. So I get that all the time. Russian raw chicken or turkey or meat, we touched on it. And I know in the Caribbean, our culture is a very clean culture, right? We think it's very nasty not to wash your chicken. Who believes that? I grew up hearing my grandmother say, how could you not wash that chicken? Did you guys hear that?
Yes.
It's a culture. We wash our chicken because it's just nasty not to wash it. However, when we wash chicken, it's not that you cannot wash the chicken. if you somehow can design a place where you can wash your chicken without causing cross-contamination and bacteria, because you don't have a salmonella-free chicken. Raw chicken has salmonella, raw meat has E. coli, raw anything it comes naturally. So when you wash the chicken in your kitchen sink, the chicken spreads the bacteria all around you. Now, what I tell people, if you want to wash your chicken, which you want to make sure that everything around your sink is out of the way. You have a bucket somewhere, you wash it. You want to, the reason they say not to wash it is because it's very difficult to prevent the bacteria from spreading. Definitely don't wash it under running water. If you have a bucket somewhere, you can keep it, contain it. Wash your hands with soap and water, because water alone doesn't get rid of the bacteria, with a little bit of bleach or something, and you can contain it. Because as much as you think you can contain it, as you saw in that first slide, if you put that glow germ, it goes everywhere. So that's the reason why they tell you not to wash it, because of the contamination. If you want to wash it, because I know that this is a culture that we have to wash chicken. Put it in a deep bucket, do not wash it under running water. Sanitize everything else you can around you, wash your hands, but just be aware of the cross-contamination. So I'm not telling you not to wash your chicken, because I know it's nasty. They say you cook it as is, you season it and you cook it as is, because you're cooking the bacteria from it, right? So if you want to insist on washing it, just be careful how you wash it and how you sanitize after. Jacqueline said she washed and take off the skin, then I clean up the area after. Yes, Jacqueline, I'm sure if I come to your house with a black light, I'll see some contamination. And it's hard. It's really hard to not to clean it. Sheridan say wash, then clean up with warm water, soap, and Clorox. Yes, that's a good thing. Do not use a sponge, because the sponge can carry cross-contamination. So Tracy said, listen, right, the person who bags the chicken could have dropped them on the floor. What to do then? If your chicken is dropped on the floor, again, disgusting, it picks up even more contamination. So yes, I know this is a major thing to grasp for the Caribbean and for Black people in general, because we are told to wash and clean, and it's clean, and you don't want the chicken blood and everything. So I'm not telling you not to wash it, because I know that's not something we can stop. It's just be aware of the cross-contamination potential, because the chicken is basically full of salmonella. The meat is not as bad, but the chicken and the turkey is really bad. Island people use vinegar and lemon. Yes, that controls it to some extent, but again, it's still potential for spreading. I wash my chicken, but I wash it in a bucket, in a plastic bag, outside the way, and I clean the heck out of everything when I'm finished. Okay? Okay. So now that was your kitchen hygiene. And I think when we don't have to watch it, the same one, Latoya, we watched. We can go now to personal hygiene. So personal hygiene is the same thing. It's, again, common sense. We talked about bacteria. We know bacteria can cause illness. It's the #1 cause of foodborne illness. People are dying, kids are dying, even though in the Caribbean, we don't think we have it. I know if we start monitoring it, we find it. The day when we think, oh, I'm not feeling well, that could have been food poisoning. Because it's not because we don't have a reason to get it, we have it. And so your opportunity here today is just to be aware. And as you go into your farming business, you then become responsible for more than your family. You're responsible for the people that you are giving the food to eat. And we'll talk a lot about produce, not the food that you have to cook, but the ones that you, the produce part that doesn't get a kill step. And a kill step means it's not getting cooked. So we talk a little bit about personal hygiene. Again, those are not new. This is stuff that we need to do every day. But again, as we talk about food, it becomes important. So next slide. Again, practice, prevent, transfer of dangerous microorganisms. What is the #1 way that bacteria gets transferred? Who can, what do you guys think? Anybody, what do you think is the #1 way bacteria get spread? Anybody?
Touching?
My hand is your hand.
Your hands, right. Not washing of hands. Now, COVID did a lot of bad things, but I was about to, when I used to go to St. Lucia, I was about to go with the government and do a hand wash, get them to do a hand wash campaign. COVID has helped a lot in hand washing. It would be amazed how people use the bathroom. And I get in trouble a lot because I go to the airport bathroom and you know when people don't wash the bathroom, you go in there and you hear the noise and then they flush and they just walk right out. So I watch their shoes and make sure that I'm not anywhere near them. If I'm there, I remind them to wash their hands. And sometimes I get dirty looks. But think about what happens when you don't wash your hand. And even though you don't use the bathroom, but the fact that you are touching the handles, the doors, everything, that's a major source of contamination. And your bacteria, if you could see it, like you put glow germ on it, you sneeze in your hands, you scratch your face, you scratch your hair, your nails, bacteria is all over our hands. So preventing the transfer, personal hygiene becomes so important for home, as well as when you go to your farm and when you become a business owner where you're selling food for others besides your family. Next slide. Again, like I said, I thank COVID because how to wash your hands properly. I tell the kids to do the ABC song because just putting water on your hands is not enough. You need to wet your hands, wash it, lather it. We say 10 seconds, dry. Again, the air drying is great. If you see that at some places you have cloth drying, I don't trust those because those contain bacteria. Tracy said she's a big germ geek. Her hands get sore sometimes. I'm with you, Tracy. I'm washing my hands all the time. And then turning off the tap. You see the person is using a paper towel. So a lot of the times we wash our hand, and I wash it all the time. And then we pull the door handle and we just recontaminate our hands. So I always have a piece of paper that I use after I use the bathroom. If there's no paper, I use the toilet paper and make sure that I'm using that to open the doors, because everybody else is touching that door handle. And if you don't wash your hands properly, that door handle gets contaminated. Your fingers, your nails, the top of your hands, it is such a critical thing to do when we wash our hands. And when you teach kids, like I said, I teach my kids, I tell them to say the ABC song, saying ABCD, that song, and then that gives you enough time to know that adequate hand washing. Now, washing with water alone will not get rid of the bacteria. You need to use soap. Okay, next slide. We talked about using soap. Next one. Personal hygiene, go back. We need to brush our teeth at a minimum of 2 times a day. We need to, next slide. Wash the body often, wear clean clothes. Now you always say that's common sense, but not a lot of people do that. Either they don't have the ability to, or they don't. But that becomes critical once we decide we want to get into the business, which is why you are here, of farming and feeding food to others. We are taking on that responsibility of feeding food, and we are responsible to make sure that we are doing everything in our powers to ensure that the food we provide is safe. It's the same thing we want when we go out to eat. We want to trust the food supply. We want to trust that the people who are preparing our food is doing that. Sometimes in the big factories, we forget that we are making food. And you'd be amazed in those big factories, in a big kitchen, how people forget that they are making food. If you think about it, you don't eat a lot. You don't eat out, you don't trust. But you have to be aware. Tracy said, if we start to talk about what we touch throughout the day, Lord have mercy. Yes, Tracy, we have to worry about it. It's just like the flies. We don't think about the flies, but when we talk about our hands, cleaning our hands becomes important. Next slide. Again, if you feel that you are sick, don't go to work, get medical advice. Remember, I said, if you have foodborne poisoning, there's no cure for it. You can fix the symptoms, but do not go to work if you can avoid it. Stay home. If you are sneezing. If you think about when you sneeze, you basically taking a mouthful of germs and spreading it everywhere to whoever is next to you. Okay, next slide. Yes, our hands touches everything, our face. So I think this is the end of the slides, Latoya. And we have 7:38. I left enough time for us to have discussion because I know it's a lot of talking, but I wanted to give us enough time before we go into that to have an open dialogue of what you heard and share. I'm gonna bring myself back up on the slide. And then I'd like to hear from you about what you've heard for the hour and a half, what questions you have that we can answer, and make it an open dialogue. I can learn from you. I want to know what's goat water. Somebody mentioned goat water as a culture. I'd like to hear what goat water is. So here's your chance to unplug and raise your hands, ask questions, use the chat. Let's use that time for us to get to know each other. What are you gonna do differently? Is there anything that surprised you in what we said besides not washing your chicken? Is there anything that you heard that was new to you? Is there anything that is, you know about it, but you know, have you experienced food poisoning? Go ahead. Sorry, was somebody trying to say something? So nobody has anything. Goat water is another way of saying goat soup. Okay, I got it.
Okay, hi. I thought that not washing the chicken was a Caucasian thing, because that's what they say. But once you've explained, I understand. And to a point when you do, when I do wash chicken, very rarely because I don't like it. When I do wash chicken, I have a basin, a bucket of a basin in the house that's for the chicken, and then we bleach, Clorox the place down and clean down the sinks and so forth, because there was always an after scent. So he cleans hot water and he cleans the place down, but it's always done in a particular bucket that nobody else will use because we're not really.
That's a good way of getting around it. That's very similar to what I do, right? And to your question about a Caucasian thing, that is a joke that white people don't wash their chicken.
Yes. It's an English white thing again. Actually, it's an English white thing. They don't wash their They don't wash anything. They just put everything in the frying pan and go. They don't wash nothing. Salads,
Well,
nothing. It's
again,
just
there's a scientific reason why not, because
Yes.
again, it's the cross-contamination potential. So if you, like I said, I'm not telling you not to wash your chicken, because I know it's a cultural thing, but you have to be aware of why you should not wash your chicken, and how do you control it. So you can do it in a controlled environment. And I think what you just explained, it's a very safe way of doing that.
Yes. And also, like Jody said, eating out. My mother always said, what the eye don't see, the heart don't grieve, because sometimes you don't see how the kitchen is. You just eat the food and you go with the Lord. But the best way is to keep yourself healthy so you can withstand the little upset stomach if it comes your way, unfortunately. So best thing to do is keep yourself quite healthy so you're strong enough to withstand anything that is coming, and then you can go from there. But like I said, sometimes some of these kitchens that you go into, you really don't know. I normally follow where the environmental health persons that here in Nevis, where they eat, I eat. If they don't eat there, I don't eat there, and it stays like that. I am friends with them, so it stays like that. That's me for this evening.
Yeah. So Ronnie Tucker said, okay, we got a good mate. Sheridan said, do you recommend using gloves in the kitchen? So glove usage is a very tricky one, especially in manufacturing. Yes, you can use gloves, but you have to have proper handling of gloves. And people use gloves to protect their hands, and they touch everything. If you go and you look at people, especially some of the street vendors, they use gloves, but they don't change the gloves between touching the garbage or touching the food. They don't change their gloves between taking the money and touching the food. If you are going to use gloves, you have to be careful that you're not transferring from cross-contaminating the raw food with the gloves. If you use gloves, there's one way to get rid of the gloves by pushing your hands on the inside, flipping it on the outside, and throwing it away. But for reasons, economical reason or whatever, I kind of prefer people not to use the gloves, because they forget. Once you put your gloves in, you think you are protected, and you use gloves, everything. It's not to protect your hands, it's to protect the people that you are serving, which means you have to change your gloves often, or wash it or sanitize it. So the gloves story goes a long way. It's a big, big problem in the US, in Europe, in the big manufacturing plants. You have to wear gloves, but you have to wear it properly. Somebody said, do I eat out? First of all, my family don't like to go out with me because they think I spoil the dinner. So I stop talking when people get sick. If I see them eating their food, I just go, ooh. Like my mother, she's 82 years old, and she insists on eating medium rare steak. So I don't buy it for her. I just let her take her own risk. So I do eat out. I eat a lot of cooked food that's on flames. I eat food I will not eat a salad out. I don't buy bag salads, because bag salad, we'll talk a little about it. You can't clean it. So yes, I eat out, but I eat a lot of cooked food. I always somehow pass to look at the back of the kitchen. I go to places I know, I go to friends' house, but I'm not a big outside eating person, but I do eat out. Tracy, yes, street food is yummy, but find that flame, find that bathroom, find that washroom. And sometimes, it's endemic, because you don't get sick because you get used to it. Me, I'll get sick in a heartbeat. I go to Mexico and I just watch the water and I get sick, because I've done myself an injustice. I've cleaned out my microflora, so I don't have nothing to protect me, because I have not been eating bad food. So the minute I get one drop of something, I get sick. But in the other places, there's a place where it becomes endemic. You eat it all the time, your body gets used to it, and you don't get as sick. So there's something there to that. Laurenti You know, I hope I'm saying that. Thank you for sharing so well. I like the expression, when in doubt, throw it out, for sure. I also often taken aback with the don't wash your chicken statement. I have an assigned dish and I use lemon and vinegar. Great. So again, it's common sense. It's being aware of why we do things, right? So we have more time. Anybody else? Any experience? And how many people have experienced foodborne illness? Anybody got food poisoning that you are aware of? I have. I got it one time, and I was one of the people who ate the rice.
I got it from McDonald's. I got
Yes.
it from the Mac pork muffin or something like that, and I was sick for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
I was down for 1 week. The doctor came to see me. He just looked at me and asked me a question, and I told him what I had to eat, and that was it. And I was down for 2 weeks, and I lost a lot of weight, and I was thrown up green. It was horrible. Hence to say I never went back there again, and that was like 25 years ago. So I haven't had anything
So
from them.
right now, there is a law that, and again, remember I said that there's big recall for the E. coli, and there's a video out there, if you guys want to see it, it's terrible, where those kids got the E. coli poisoning because the factory at that time, the restaurant decided it was okay not to cook the food to the temperature, and the kids ate that pink meat, and it was contaminated with E. coli, and a lot of kids died. And because the E. coli, the toxin, destroyed the kidney, and it was a horrible death. So the raw meat, especially the ground beef. The steak, you can probably get away with it by not cooking the inside, because the inside, unless you cook it, is not as contaminated. But when you think about the ground beef, you're basically mushing up everything on the outside, inside. So it becomes really dangerous. So just like you were growing up to say, don't eat the raw chicken. If you see pink, don't eat it. If you are looking at hamburger, especially, make sure you eat it well done. My family say I take away all the fun out of food, because when I cook it, it's too hard, they don't want to eat it. I'm like, but I will save your soul. The chefs don't like to cook the food too much, because again, they say it's bad, but I like my food really well done. So Beverly, let's see what else you have. What is your take on some fish like Heinz that our parents say are usually poisonous? I'm not familiar with what fish is the Heinz. What's Heinz fish? Lorenz, you know what's Heinz fish? I'm not familiar with that fish. Hello? Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Somebody said something about Heinz fish.
That is the name. You hear me? That is the name that was given to the fish, a special kind of fish. I think it just has a reddish sort of color and maybe some dots on it. But I always heard my mother say that you should not eat that because it's likely to be poisonous. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure about it, but there's probably something in it. So I don't know. It's not food poisoning. It's probably has some kind of toxin. It's just like ackee in Jamaica, that they say if you don't eat the ackee at the right time, it can be toxic. So maybe there's some kind of poison in that fish, but not food poisoning. It's just that the nature of the fish. I'm not familiar with it.
I think it has in mercury.
As well?
Mercury, I think it has in mercury.
Yeah,
like
high
the
level of mercury. Yeah, like tuna has a high level.
Yeah,
of
there's a snapper that
Yeah.
you're not supposed to have here. It has a
Yeah.
different kind of head. They said
Yeah.
where it's fish from, there's mercury in the water. But
Yeah.
saying that now, it seems like you get food poisoning from meat. So are we saying the best way to go with vegan?
Well, no, because you can get killed from lettuce more so than meat. So meat, at least meat you can cook it, but the lettuce and the other stuff, once you get contaminated, the vegetables, you can't cook them. So nobody's safe. Just have to be careful.
Agreed. Theo? Sorry,
Yes.
I have one. There's another video that was in your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to play it now?
Sure.
All righty.
Your food, you can make it healthier, tastier, and you can even save money. But there are some things to keep in mind if you're going to prepare meals in your own kitchen. Let's take a look at what this home chef is cooking up. I wonder what she's making.
Hey, how much longer until dinner?
I just gotta saute the chicken and cut the veggies for the salad. Shouldn't be very long. Maybe 20 minutes?
Chicken salad. Now I'm getting hungry. Let's see if we can speed things up a bit. I don't actually recommend cutting this fast unless you've had some culinary training. It looks like this chef likes to use minimal equipment. It certainly makes cleanup way easier at the end of a meal. Wait a minute. I must have sped this up too fast. Did you see that? Maybe I should ask about what you didn't see. So, what do you think about this recipe? Is it missing anything? Or maybe it has a little extra something you'd rather not eat for dinner. No, I'm not talking about the tomatoes. I'm talking about the extra side of GI upset, also known as food poisoning. For this video, a substance called glow germ was sprinkled on the raw chicken to illustrate cross-contamination. Just like bacteria and other microbes, you can't see glow germ under normal conditions. A UV light will show us where the glowing chemical ends up during the food preparation process. Cross-contamination is a process where harmful bacteria from one food spreads to other foods, surfaces, hands, or equipment. Even if meat has been cooked correctly, meals can still become contaminated with pathogens if cross-contamination isn't avoided during preparation processes. It can be caused by many factors. In this case, using a chopping board to prepare raw meats and then using the same board for ready-to-eat food. Cross-contamination is dangerous as it can easily lead to foodborne illness and, on a larger scale, an outbreak. To sum it all up, this meal is not as healthy as it looks. Let's review what our chef got right and where she went wrong. Ideally, she would have used separate chopping boards for meat and veggies, which would reduce the risk of this cross-contamination occurring. Our chef did recognize that the chicken juices needed to be removed from the cutting board and knife in order to reuse them for the salad. Unfortunately, water alone doesn't do the trick, no matter how much you scrub. Before reusing them, you have to thoroughly clean and sanitize plates, utensils, and cutting boards that have come in contact with raw meat, poultry, seafood, or eggs. You should always use separate plates and utensils for cooked and raw foods. Our chef transferred the raw chicken from the cutting board to the pan on the stove using her original packaging and her hands, which is fine since the package will be thrown away and the hands need to be washed anyway, except she skipped that step. While cooking, you have to wash your hands properly. This includes after you handle any raw meats and after cooking. Plus, all counters and surfaces should be thoroughly cleaned and sanitized after raw meats have been anywhere near them. Don't forget to clean things you touched before you washed your hands. Let's try this again.
Hey, how much longer until dinner?
I just gotta saute the chicken and cut the veggies for the salad. Shouldn't be very long. Maybe 20 minutes?
This time, after cutting raw meat, our chef washes the items she's going to reuse and then washes her hands thoroughly. After cutting the veggies for the salad and grating the cheese, she washes them again after all meal preparation is done.
Dinner's ready.
And this time, indigestion is not included. Bon appetit!
So this slide was a summary of everything we talked about. The cutting board, you notice she was using a plastic cutting board. There's nothing wrong with using a cutting board, but you want to stay away from wooden cutting boards. And the reason why you want to stay away from wooden cutting boards is because you create those little nooks and crannies in the board when you use the knives. You can make those little lines. And then the bacteria can get in there and it's really hard to clean it as opposed to the plastic cutting board. So when you have people say don't use wood, that's the reason. So it's preferable to use the plastic cutting boards. And if you use plastic cutting boards and you only have one, make sure you clean and sanitize between raw and ready to eat. So that was a summary of what we had in there. We had Sarah said she get fish poisoning, I can't say it properly, is often caused by fish feeding on a toxic marine microalgae. And it's much more common in warm water regions like here in the Caribbean. That's something new that I didn't know about, so thank you for that. Jacqueline said she never uses the cutting board for meat to cut vegetables, prevent cross-contamination. That's one good way. Or you can always make sure you sanitize with soap, water, and a little bit of bleach. She needed a different board for food, meat, and dairy food. Yes, but not everybody can afford a different board, so it's okay if you can clean and sanitize in between. I have different boards, but that's me for what I know, and not everybody can do it. I know a lot of my family don't have different boards. They use whatever they have. Okay, so that comes to an end of our day one. And this is a setup for bacteria, microorganism, and if you get to understand what that is about you as an individual, as your family, as the role you play in food safety. And then once we transition, how does that apply to you as a farmer, as an agro processor, and what is the role that you have to practice on the farm, in your agro processing facility, and as you prepare food to ensure that you are the #1 person that's the front line, and you are doing everything possible to make sure that you are protecting the consumer, that you are giving yourself an advantage, that once you get your food, people are not gonna associate you with giving them food poisoning. Just like you don't want the same thing to happen to you when you go out to eat or when you go to your friend's house, is unfortunately, we can't close ourselves in and we can't stop eating everything. But we have to be aware of what's out there and what we are doing to protect it, and how do we protect ourselves, our family, and our consumers. I hope that was a little bit of enlightening, and hopefully not too many things new, but the goal here was to introduce you to food safety and to understand the role that it plays for us as farmers, as business people, as family members, and how do we continue to create that food safety culture. Tomorrow, we will transition to what that looks like on the farm. And the day after, we'll talk a little bit about agro-processing and how do we transition from that to farming. I think it's 8 o'clock, but if there's any other burning questions or any feedback you guys have from me.
We do have a few questions in the chat. Don Hatch Percival was trying to clarify. Are you saying that chopping board are bad?
I didn't hear that, sorry.
Okay.
Are you saying that, Dawn, okay, I'm reading it. Are you saying that chopping boards are bad? Yes, wooden chopping board is typically bad for use. It's discouraged because over time, when you use the wooden cutting board, that you are creating nooks and crannies in the board. When you use your knives, you'll see those lines and those things on the board is not safe, and the bacteria can go in there and you cannot clean it. So it's discouraged. Plastic is better because then, even though you have little lines, it's easier to clean. That's why. I hope that answers the question, Dawn. Someone who attended a food preparation seminar said she was told that once a refrigerated food item shows signs of spoilage, do not cut off the area, throw it out. Now, that could be true, but molds, and you can cut the mold out. Mold won't make you sick. If you have a little bit of mold on a piece of bread, I throw mine out. But if you have it, then it's not gonna make you sick. But again, be safe, throw it out. When in doubt, throw out. I use a mahogany chopping board for my vegetables only, okay? I guess wooden is harder to clean than plastic. Yes, Sheridan, good night, thank you very much. All right, ladies, I enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I get excited about it. I think educating, the more people we have educated on the proper handling of food, food is our #1 source of survival. And we just need to be careful how we prepare it and what are the common sense things that we have to use to prepare to prevent us from getting sick. Now, again, everything we say there, it's up to you to use it. I'm not saying go out and throw your wooden boards. I'm saying be aware of what the risk is of using it, okay? So everything we say here, it's up to you to be educated and make an educated decision. All right, ladies, that's it. We are only 3 minutes over time. Latoya, I told you we'd get over the slide.
Yes,
Latoya got really nervous.
I am so impressed. Honestly, I was gonna send you a WhatsApp after.
Yeah.
To say, gosh, you did it.
Yeah.
Time to spare.
All right, ladies, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for staying and being active participant. I look forward to it next week.
All right, good night, ladies.